Thanks for the book, Rajeev. And I'm looking forward to reading it. And I'm intrigued by the title already. Let's talk a little bit about, just tell me why ESG is not enough, sustainable sustainability. Tell me a bit about it.
Well, if you think about it, everybody's talking about sustainability these days, which is a good thing.
Almost everybody.
Almost everybody. And there's $43 trillion in ESG funds. So there's no shortage of cheap capital, if you will, on paper, to address environmental and social concerns. More than 100 countries have passed legislation, ESG-related legislation, lately. And there's a plethora of incentives, green incentives, tax incentives, and now they're even talking about, CEO in compensation being linked to ESG markers and things like that. So
the IRA in the US is
tell me
massive,
about it, right?
Yeah.
So capital, incentives, regulation, and you would think that the world's on it, right? That there's a problem and the world is on it. My question is, then why are we moving towards 2.5 degrees instead of 1.5 degrees? Why is inequality increasing? Get this, Timur, I was shocked. The top 1% of the richest people in the world have twice as much wealth as 6.9 billion people. And here's another shocker. 22 men, right? 22 rich men. You're laughing already.
No, these numbers are terrible. They're really shocking numbers, aren't
you
they?
know this one already?
Yeah.
22 rich men have more wealth than all the women of Africa put together.
That's horrendous, isn't it?
And by the way, cybercrime has now overtaken the global drug trade as the most lucrative crime in the world. So, with all this talk about sustainability, money, regulation, incentives, chasing it, why are we going in the opposite direction with environmental and social sustainability? That's the reason I wrote this book.
But just frame it a little bit more closely for me. Okay, so there are a million problems. There are a million inconsistencies in the way that we're addressing this. But it's early days yet. I mean, we're trying to get consensus on what the problem is, how to address it, who should do it, in what form. Just give me a précis of what you're suggesting in this as to what's lacking and what should be done.
I like the way you said it's early days yet. Timur, the issue is we don't have time.
That is true.
To say that it's early days and we'll get better at it, we don't have that luxury anymore, right?
No, look, sorry, let me take that phrase back. That was a horrible phrase.
No,
it's early days yet, and it shouldn't be because we've known about this for decades.
That's right.
But it's only now that really people are beginning to sit up and take notice, right?
Fair enough. So then the question is, what's missing? What's the missing link? What do we need to do differently, right? And we wanted to find out that if money, incentives, and capital, etc., is not doing the job, then what needs to happen? So we then said, okay, but how do we look for where the answer is, right? And then I came across this another interesting fun fact. Let me ask you this. Do you know that in the top 100 economies in the world by size, how many of them are countries and how many of them are companies? Take a guess.
Ooh, that's an intriguing question. The top 100.
Yes, the largest economies, the 100 largest economies in the world, how many of them are countries and how many of them are companies?
Well, since you asked that question, then it's got to be a weird answer, hasn't it? I mean, I've never thought of it that way, but you're right. I mean, there can't be more than a couple of dozen countries with significant enough economic GDP output.
You got it. Only 31 of the top 100 by size are countries. 69 of the top 100 economies are companies. And that led us to the conclusion that if we are going to solve for environmental and social sustainability, business has to take ownership. We cannot leave it to governments alone. We cannot leave it to philanthropy alone. We cannot leave it to civil society alone, right? So then, how do we find the answer? Now that we know that business has to play a major role, we've said, let's look at those businesses that are actually making a positive impact on environment and society. Are they giving up some profit in order to address environmental or social concerns, or are they doing something else? And it turned out they're not giving up $1 of profit, not a cent of profit. They were actually driving superior shareholder returns by addressing the very challenges we're talking about. Climate change, socioeconomic inequality, cyber vulnerability. They believed that the more we do for society and the environment, the more our business is going to do better and the longer we are going to thrive.
So this is where we start treading upon people's political conceptions and preconceptions and their ideologies. I have no doubt that there are plenty of companies, and from what I see in the book, you've named a few of them in here, that do manage to make decent profits, even above average profits, within the framework of what we would consider ESG activity. But the question is, are there enough of them? And can every company be that?
I'll come back to that. Are there enough of them? The answer is no. And can every company be that? Let's come back to that. But the question, let's talk about what we found out, because we talked to 100 such companies, not just spoke to them. We went there, we lived with them, we worked with them, we saw how they operate. And some of these companies are 100, 200, even 300 years old, by the way, right? And they've been doing it from day one. So and we call them doing well by doing good. They are driving superior shareholder returns by addressing the very challenges that are threatening us today. Why are they doing it? Not because of cheaper capital, not because of incentives, not because of regulatory pressure. They're doing it because they wanted to. That's point number one. B, we found that they believe in certain ideas, certain values, certain principles. Now, they each call them different words, but the four big ideas that they all have in common is, first is they believe in interdependence.
What does that mean?
So interdependence is the belief that the more I give, the more I get.
Okay.
That the more I do for society, the more my business is going to thrive.
So this is the stakeholder thesis. It's not I am a company, this is what I do. It's I'm a company and I exist in an ecosystem that is interdependent.
Yes, but make no mistake, these people are not talking about compromising shareholder interest. They want to maximize shareholder wealth. That's why they are in business. But their belief is that the more I do for society, the more my shareholder is going to benefit, and for a longer time.
All right, so interdependence number one.
Interdependence. Second is long-term view. They strongly believe that there may be some short-term costs here, but if we do the right thing by society and environment, over the long term, we're going to be more successful than the average business. The third is ownership mentality. Very, very important. They see themselves as stewards of planet Earth and society and take ownership to addressing these challenges through their business.
Again, that sort of conception that it's not just us internally looking, we're part of a bigger
Yes,
thing.
and if not us, who else is going to address them? That's ownership mentality. And the fourth one, most important, is creative resilience. That if we are going to drive shareholder returns by addressing environmental and social concerns, we're going to have to innovate. And innovation means you fail 8 out of 10 times, but we will not give up. Hence, creative resilience. So those four ideas these people have in common, these kinds of companies have in common. And we saw that they not only outlive the average span of a company these days by decades, if not hundreds of years, they're also driving very good profitable growth.
It's interesting to reflect on the fact that it seems that there have been some studies done that the number of companies that are in the S&P 500 list, their tenure in that list of the top 500 companies has become shorter and shorter and shorter over the decades. People's long-term thinking has shrunk quite a lot. But anyway, having said all of that,
but you've raised a very important point that the long-term thinking has shrunk, right? And it's this short-term thinking that is actually reducing the life of businesses. Now we are obsessed with quarterly earnings, right? And yet exactly that is killing companies.
So give me an example from the book of a company that does these things well and prospers.
I'll give you a very, very old example. Faber-Castell of Germany, right?
The pencil people.
Pencil people, 270 years of profitable growth. And they started providing, long before sustainability and ESG was even a thing, they started providing employee benefits like housing and insurance and education to their employees a full 40 to 50 years before such things became the law in Germany. In fact, what they did paved the way for what became labor laws in Germany. And they have been innovating ever since, keeping sustainability at the forefront, sustainability first strategies. And you talk to them and they'll say, the reason we are still in business is because for us, society always came first. That's just one example. And that's a detailed case in the book. Another one is...
I just love that idea, because the irony of, I mean, if there's anything that is more old tech than a pencil, I can't think of it right now, and yet they've survived 270 years in this computer age.
Interestingly, in the 1980s, when the pencil industry was declared almost dead, who's going to use pencils anymore? Now we're all going digital, right? At this time, when the future of the pencil industry was really bleak, as per all the experts, they invested hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in sustainable forestry in Brazil, so that 20 years down the line, all the wood for their pencils would come from sustainably certified forests. Well, 20 years down the line, the people who made the decision may not be around. 20 years down the line, there may not be no pencil industry, and yet they did that. And they innovated. Today they sell they sell high-end artistic supplies. They got into cosmetics. They sell even a pencil that costs $250. It's called the perfect pencil, and you have to wait for it.
Fantastic. What a great story. Okay, so while we've been talking, I know you're going to go to Tata, aren't you? Because I've done some work with Tata before.
Yes. So the other example I was going to give you was Tata. 155 years. Same story. Right from day one, they were focusing on society and environment. So long before the first steel plant came up in what is today called Jamshedpur, those days it was a very remote village called Sakchi in India. Long before the steel plant was completed, they built hospitals, they built parks, they built schools, and built a whole township. You know, Jamshedji Tata, the founder, never lived to see the steel plant getting completed. He wrote a letter to his sons. Make sure you build long and broad avenues with trees planted on either side, alternate one of a fast-going variety. Make sure you have enough space for hockey and football stadiums. Make sure there are Mohammedan mosques, Christian churches, and Hindu temples. So his sons not only did that, they went further and did even more and built a whole township. And they've been doing that since. And today, they're a $365 billion conglomerate. Till today, sustainability first strategy is their core.
Yeah, absolutely. But, you know, as we said, these are a handful of companies, and they're the minority in terms of business ethics, business practice, business process. So what are you saying in this book? That we should all be like Tata and Faber-Castell? Or, I mean, is there a strategy or a methodology by which...
Yes. So first of all, you believe in those 4 values that I mentioned: interdependence, long-term view, ownership mentality, and creative resilience. And what these companies do, they don't just put posters on the wall. They actually embed those values into their DNA, so that anything and everything the company does is based on those values. Now, based on those values, they also pursue a different kind of purpose. They definitely want to make money. They definitely want to maximize shareholder wealth, but they want to create a collective better future, not just for the shareholder, but for a wide variety of stakeholders, including society and the environment. So that's the model. We called it steward leadership, learning from these 100 companies that we studied, okay? That they practice steward leadership day in and day out. They have a compass, literally, of the 4 values and their purpose, and they put every decision through that. One other company that does this very well is Mars, the confectionery and pet care company, right? They have they have something called the Mars Compass. Now, they don't call it interdependence, they call it mutuality, but it's the same idea, right? So in every conference room, in every office of Mars, you'll find the Mars Compass on the wall. And employees are required that when you finish a meeting, in the last 10 minutes, look at the compass and see the decisions that we made today, were they in congruence or were they in violation of the compass? If the latter, revisit. So that's how these companies do it.
Mars is actually a fascinating company, is it? They have a number of initiatives that don't really fit with the conception of capitalism as Wall Street would see it.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So that's another detailed case study in the book. Now, your question, can every company do this? Can we expect every company to become a steward leadership company? Of course not. I mean, we're not naive, right? Everything that we learned from these 100 companies is actually counter to the human condition. We're asking people to think interdependence, whereas the normal human condition, the way my brain is wired, is I am me, myself. If I don't take care of myself, who will? That's the normal condition. We're asking people to think long-term view. Oh, heck no. I want to benefit in the shortest possible time. We're asking people to take ownership. Excuse me? I want an easy life. And we're asking for creative resilience, innovation, which means fail until you succeed. No way. I don't want to do that. And then to build a collective better future? Sorry, I want to build a collective future only for myself. So everything that we learned is contrary to the way the brain is wired.
Well, if that's what you're saying, then we're lost. I mean, your book is not going to change human nature. How are we going to make a difference here?
There is one hope. So why did my team and I write this book, right? If it was a lost case already, there's one hope. And that hope came from a gentleman called Wilfredo Pareto in 1906. You know what I'm talking about, right?
I know the Pareto principle. How does it
Exactly.
apply here?
It hasn't been debunked until now in any walk of life. The Pareto principle started with Wilfredo actually noticing that 20% of the pods in his garden produced 80% of the peas. He then noticed that 20% of Italians owned 80% of land and wealth in Italy and saw that that was true all over Europe and saw the former was true all over agricultural produce all over the world. And then it turns out that the 80-20 rule applies everywhere. Even in modern times, 20% of your code produces 80% of your bugs. 20% of your salespeople produce 80% of your revenue. 20% of your customers give you 80% of your revenue. In every walk of life, 80-20 still applies. So, in other words, if 20% of the people and companies became like Faber-Castell and Tata, we will save the world. So we need to convince only 2 out of 10 people, and that is why we at Stewardship Asia believe that this work needed to be done.
Okay, so we're talking 80-20 principle here, but does that 20% of people who can make a difference exist, or do we need to persuade them to act? Where are we in that?
I have no way to measure that. That at what percentage are we at this point in time? I have a gut on that. That no, we're not even close to 20, and anywhere near close to 20% yet. So my assumption.
So what you're trying to do here is persuade them.
Yes, my assumption is that we are far from 20% and we need to get to 20%, but I can't give you data to. That's just a thing.
And how does that persuasion process work then?
So I think, like I was saying earlier, we have to find every possible means of persuasion and inspiration. Writing this book was just one of them.
What can governments take from this? Do you think that there is a role for government in this process? Is there a mindset that government should adopt?
Oh, absolutely. This book and what we are trying to do now is shining a spotlight on business and the role of business. I don't ever mean to suggest that there is no role for government or other sections of society. Everybody has to play their role.
So your next book will be a book about government.
So government here, and the thing about that, you raised something very interesting about power, right? That too much business power. Well, too much government power also leads to corruption. Too much power corrupts, absolutely, as they say. So what we have to watch out for is how is that power used? And that is where I am appealing to governments as I'm speaking to them in different countries as we are traveling, is please focus on values-based education, right at the starting from school and college levels. And let's bring about this values-based revolution. Absolutely, you need to pass regulations. You need to enforce regulations because, as we said in the 80-20 rule, 80% of the people will not listen to a word of what we are talking about, right? For them, we need stiff regulation so that they can minimize harm. Because regulation does a great job of minimizing harm. It doesn't create the innovation we need. For that, we need the 20%, right? So absolutely, governments need to be on top of regulation. They need to incentivize where commercial capital is not the obvious choice. Yeah. Right? And they need to create infrastructure for innovation to flourish. In addition to that, I think what they can do a little bit more of is further emphasize values-based education in schools and colleges. Character building ought to be as important, if not more important, as, say, STEM education. And that's where governments can play a role, I think.
That's perfect. Great. I mean, I think that's really important.
So one of the ideas that I had, which I wanted to actually talk to you about, is hosting a podcast series where you and I host these directly, jointly, and invite steward leaders into our show and get them to tell their stories. Nothing like people watching somebody who's done it and hearing from them how they did it and why they did it. What do you think about that?
I think the podcast and video cast like we're doing here is a really interesting and effective means of communicating. It's also, in many cases, an influencing mechanism. As we know, influencers are now a big thing. So as I think about it, yeah. I mean, there are some interesting people around that we could get in to talk about this stuff and generate some feedback, some engagement, some forward thinking. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that's one way, And the other thing that we are doing, of course, is we are we're doing we've created a whole lot of executive education programs that we are offering to companies. Some we do as open enrollment, where we work with, say, the Singapore Management University or other business schools where anybody can come. And then we do also custom programs for companies. We're also using digital means of engaging people. So one of the things that we've created at Stewardship Asia is stewardshipcommons.com. Think of that site as the Wikipedia, but focused only on environmental and social sustainability, 100% crowdsourced. Anybody that is profitably solving an environmental or social issue can become a contributor. Anybody can become a user. It's totally free. So there are many ways in which we can do this. And one of the things that I'm excited about talking to you, as I said, is this idea of the podcast. Let's call it Sustainable Sustainability. And what do you think? We both host somebody one at a time or two at a time sometimes, and just chat with them.
I think this could be really interesting, actually. I mean, I think we could find some fairly fun people to talk to and inspiring people to talk to.
The other day I was in Denver, Colorado, and I met this very interesting guy, Ed Van Dyne. Now he is collecting plastic, which would otherwise end up in landfills or the oceans, and converting it into ammonia in a zero oxygen environment. And that is going to be used both as a fertilizer and as a hydrogen fuel. We need to talk to people like that.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Very good.
Let's get some people in.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
So
what do you want to call it?
As I said, let's call it Sustainable Sustainability. If you're okay with that, will be the title of the book.
All right.
And let's see how it goes. How about this? We get together. I got to run now, but we get together in a week or so when I'm back. Make an initial list of people we want to speak to. Get a few on the calendar, and let's get started. See how it goes.
Done.
Done deal.
Fantastic.